Okay, y'all, put your hands together for Special Olympics Maryland board member and director of Integrated Public Safety and Justice at Peregrine Technologies, Tim Shriver, Jr.
Good morning, Texas. Oh, come on. Good morning, Texas. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for having me here. I am so excited about this conference. I'm so excited to celebrate with you all today the incredible accomplishments of the people in this room and the officers that you all represent. I learned something on stage earlier. Apparently, you have to move to Texas to use the word y'all. I'm from Maryland. I use y'all all the time, but I guess that's not allowed. But I hope you'll forgive me here in Texas that a Marylander uses y'all. I am, to echo some of what you've already heard on the stage today, I'm here to talk to you about the why, your why, for taking part in this movement. My why stems from the fact that I happen to be the grandson of the founder of Special Olympics. I was born and raised in this movement from a young age, and that led me to feel like I knew a lot about Special Olympics when I walked in the doors of this conference last year, my first time at an international law enforcement torch run conference. I had no idea how little I knew. And so what I want to just talk to you briefly about today is not just finding your why, but the impact your why can have on this broader movement, at least through my eyes. As I said, I grew up within this movement, and I arrived here last year not realizing at all the full scale of the law enforcement torch run. I was very aware as a former unified athlete myself, as a coach, as a volunteer. I've seen the law enforcement torch run at the local, the state, the national, the international level. I was very much aware of the power of officers showing up for the torch run, showing up for Special Olympics. I think the chaplain used I love this, the ministry of presence, that power of showing up for our athletes. I was keenly aware that I'd seen the way that it shaped, the experience for many of us in the movement. But there's two things I didn't know. One, I had no idea the scale of the money raised and how much this movement depended on the literally billions of dollars raised by the law enforcement torch run. But probably more importantly for me, more movingly for me, I was not at all aware of the impact that the law enforcement torch run had on the officers of the law enforcement torch run. I've had the chance over the last year, since the conference, I've gotten to travel to a few local conferences, gotten to spend time at Special Olympics events, at torch runs, at plunges. And at each of those, I've just taken a moment to ask some of the officers, why do you do this? Why do you take time out of your busy schedule? Why do you take time out of the burdensome job you have, to come spend time with Special Olympics? And the answers have floored me, frankly. Sometimes you get the surface answer, well, I give more than I get, something like that. But I find that if you can just ask one layer deeper, so many officers have shared stories with me that I really wasn't expecting. I'll never forget one officer who shared with me that she reached the point in her career at the 7-8 year mark where she was considering quitting the profession because it had just become too hard. It'd be too much to bear. And it was the torch run that had her stick in the job and stick it out. And now she was at 15, 20 years on. I had another officer who shared with me that, he wanted his son to get to see what it meant to do good for your community. And the only way that he could show off what the law enforcement profession was doing was bringing him out to a Special Olympics event and sharing the impact on the community that the law enforcement had. I had another officer who shared that, for him, it was the place he knew he could walk into a space and be welcomed. Chief LeMunyon often says, officers are not used to getting standing ovations, but they get standing ovations at Special Olympics. And then finally, more than one officer shared with me that they had considered, and when facing some of the darkest times in their lives, had considered taking their own life, and that it was the torch run that saved their life. That was not a why, that was not a story that I was prepared to hear. And it's taken me some time to kind of take all that in, but I share that with you today because I think there's three very important reasons, three really important impacts that your why has on this broader movement. And the first has already been talked about a little bit today, but the impact that your story, that your why has on other officers. We are here celebrating over $1 billion raised, historic proportions of money raised, historic numbers of officers involved here in the United States and across the world. But I want you to know that Special Olympics has about 6 million athletes participating around the world. There are 200 million individuals with intellectual disabilities around the world. We are just getting started. We are nearly 6 decades in, and we are just getting started. And so we need more of you. I hate to say that to a room of people that have already given so much, but we need more of you. Because we are just getting started. And the way we move more officers, more departments to take part in the law enforcement torch run is through your why. Because as so many officers have shared with me, it was the why of another officer that got them to show up. So that's number one, to bring out more officers to grow the movement. Number two, the officers who didn't come because they had a friend who was a fellow officer that gave their why, came because a member of command staff told them to. And so your why has an incredibly powerful impact on command staff. And I've heard this from chiefs, I've heard this from deputy chiefs, I've heard this from members of command staff across the country, that they didn't fully realize the impact and what the possibility was of participation in the torch run for their department. And so they heard some of these stories from their officers. Stories that spoke to the mental health crisis facing officers around the country. Stories that spoke to and might be an antidote to the recruitment and retention crisis happening around the country. And so please share your why with your command staff, because it is the command staff that holds so much sway over whether or not officers get to take on-duty time to show up, whether cadets are voluntold to show up and become part of the movement. So please share your why so that we can have more members of command staff recognize the power of this movement for your departments so that we may grow this movement. Now, the third reason, the first two, I've never been an officer, I'm not a member of command staff. I can only speak to those from what I've heard. But on the third reason, I can speak as a civilian who's never sat in your shoes, who's never worn your uniform. And I can speak as a civilian who myself, before I got started working in a profession, I work at a company that serves law enforcement. And I've spent the last few years, working alongside law enforcement in a few different aspects. But before that time, I was a civilian who didn't have a lot of friends in law enforcement, didn't know law enforcement stories very well, and at different points in recent American history, doubted the integrity of the law enforcement profession. And it might be risky to stand up in front of 1,200 cops and say that, but that's the truth. That's really the truth. And I share that because it's been, for me, the chance to work alongside, police departments and sheriff's officers around the country in my professional job has been an important part of reshaping my understanding of the profession, building friendships, having colleagues who serve or have served. But there is a single most powerful thing that has moved my mind, heart, and soul, and that has been the stories that I've heard from the members of the law enforcement torch run. The stories that have brought to bear for me to fully understand the burden you all bear for us as civilians, the burdens you walk with every day because of the way you serve our communities. It has developed in me an empathy, a compassion, a gratitude that was not there before. And so I ask you to share your why to yes, bring in more officers, yes, shape your command staff, yes, grow the Special Olympics movement, but also to build unity across our country and our world, to bridge those barriers of misunderstanding. There is a greater mission here beyond just serving our athletes, no matter how important that is. There's a greater mission of unity here, and you all take part in it every day. And the more you share that why, the more you uncover and share your stories, the more folks like me can understand what you all do every day for us. So I thank you tremendously for being in this room. I thank you tremendously for the incredible money raised for the ministry of presence that you have brought to athletes and coaches and volunteers and families around the world. And I thank you for your stories, for your why, for those of you in this room that have shared your why with me, for those who have shared your why with your communities. It really does mean the world, and it has the chance to reshape the world we live in. So thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful conference, and I look forward to spending time with all of you this week.